Well, good morning, it's me, Huples cat. Nyeen. Japanese will get that. Anyway, it snowed overnight. It's not the first snow of the year here. We've had a few sprinkles, but it's the first little dump, and I thought you might enjoy it. That and Bella, the hell dog. So there you have it, first significant snowfall of the year. It's been a little cold for about a week. The bottom line here is where I live, growing seasons will be very short and work is always moving the snow, and a lot of the snow is moved mechanically by gasoline. The roads will be impassable from this point on in SHTF until probably April or May or even June in a late spring. Mobility will be by foot, by ski and by snowshoe. All good things to think about if you live in a snow belt. There is Marmalade, fat cat, and Biscuit, worst name for a cat you can possibly have with two bull terriers. The mobility aspect I think is really overlooked. Ice skates were used on frozen lakes for generations of Western European settlers, but the Inuit and the First Nations people also used a form of ice skate using reindeer bones to move around in the winter. In a lot of ways up here, moving through the bush is very difficult all the time because of its dense bush, but moving across the water by canoe or kayak, and especially by ice skate and by snowshoe, is a lot easier. So that's another thing to bear in mind, is that people will be more accessible to you in your location up here in the winter than they will be in the summer once gasoline goes. And that's a longer term SHTF scenario, and I think we tend to shy away from the longer term scenarios, other than imagine something like The Walking Dead, where yes, society's fallen and whatever it is, 6, 7, 8 years have gone by, but they can grow lots of food and it doesn't seem that difficult, and they don't have any problems preserving it because they never see snow. And Atlanta, and the area that's based in, does see snow. And it's not that easy to grow food for a large number of people and to preserve it. And the issue of the weather will actually also be a protective factor up here, because a lot of people aren't going to think, oh, I know, I'll go north of Toronto, Canada, especially in the winter. What we'll get here is a mass migration before starvation. People will head south. There's been quite a few shows that have featured this. Jericho was the notable one. People from the northern cities are going to run out of food and water fairly quickly, though cities have quite a lot of resources. They're going to truck south. They're going to walk, bicycle, car if they can, south. They're going to head towards the heat. And I think a lot of you people are in areas where you might see substantial numbers of immigrants show up. I mean substantial. You know, people think 20,000, 30,000 migrants trying to get into the United States from South America is a big deal. It really isn't. If it's 3 million or 4 million trying to show up without any resources and no society in place, that, my friends, will be a huge deal if that happens where you live. So you need to have a look at a big map, look at the migratory routes, non-automobile. Though, to be frank, a lot of the highways will be used by people on foot and bike because that's what they're habituated to. The idea of trucking across country is kind of an anathema now to most people in our society. They're not able to actually physically do it. It's tough. I am very not great shape, but you know, I make myself do stuff like this on a regular basis because I know in SHTF I won't have a choice. And a lot of the online videos on Bug Out feature automobiles, the cars driving them to a drop-off point. A lot of the bush crafting and a lot of the camping videos feature automobiles. People have driven from their home to a drop-off point, or even to where they're actually camping. It's entirely unrealistic to use that as your main training for what SHTF globally will be like. It's important to do any sort of training like that, and so I'm not knocking that. But what I'm saying is the reality would be massively worse and a lot different. Up here when it snows, it's cold, but you can use snow to build structures and windbreaks, and you can make yourself quite comfortable. The deadly time of year for us is the spring and the fall. Now, we have a significant amount of snowfall outside, but it's wet, damp snow. Kind of English snow, I always like to think of it as. It's not that dry, bone-hard, crusty snow yet. And that's a lot easier to survive in than this damp, wet stuff. Once you get wet, you're going to die. You're going to get hypothermia. So I was going to shoot the rest of this video outside and then just do some overdubbing of a couple of maths just to talk about some basic principles about what you should be looking for people that might bug into your area as opposed to where you're going to bug out, though the principles are the same. But unfortunately I took Mr. Bear with me. There's no doubt if you're underdressed, and we were only out for about 2 minutes. Most of the snow's melted as I expected it to, leaving a wet residue on the ground, and Mr. Bear does not like that and normally wear dog boots because otherwise he just goes on his back and screeches. He's quite spoiled. So what most people do online, not everybody, I know there's a few great guys out there and girls, most people look at a map and they follow the highways. So they'll have, like, say Atlanta or Boston or Philadelphia, an inland city, or somewhere like Toronto, and they will follow the highways in the main maps and they will expect the mass of migrants to come on those routes, which I think is fairly reasonable if the roads are passable, which may not actually be the case. What you need to do is get a topographic map. A topographic map, not Tales from a Topographic Ocean, which is incidentally a very, very nice album. But a topographic map. So when you look at a topographic map, what you see are the contour lines. And the finer the detail, the easier it is to figure it out. But the basic rule is, if you are bugging out, don't compromise altitude for distance. In other words, rather than go in a straight line and go up and down hills, stay on a hillside that takes you around and then across, because it's the altitude upping and downing that actually wears you out. Now the same is going to be true for any mass migration out of any of the local cities or towns in your area. They're going to tend to try to use the highways. They're probably not going to use the train rail lines for very long. They're very hard to walk on, though you will get substantial numbers of people using those. There are bike paths, people will use those. But what you need to be thinking about in your location for people coming into your location, I don't think they'll parachute, I don't think Red Dawn's going to happen. But what you need to be looking for is, are there any significant rises between you and them? If there is, they're going to bypass around that area, mostly. The other thing you might want to do if you're in a rural location is you might want to chop down a few trees in early SHTF. Although preppers pride themselves on being able to drag trees out of the way, doing so takes a lot of work, a lot of time and a lot of gasoline. And if you can lock down 5 to 10 to 15 trees at about 5 to 10 miles from your area, which effectively closes your road access down, you're trapped, you can't drive out. But people are going to have a hard time driving in. Now if you're on a main migration route, they're going to walk in. So that's another issue. How do you deal with that? People have some good ideas. I do like the fake government signs saying biohazard and all that sort of thing. I also really like the sign that points people in the direction that says things like FEMA shelter, etc. like that. But bear in mind, people are people, and you don't necessarily want to send them on a wild goose chase so they die. Your objective here is to keep them out of your area to protect your resources and indeed your own security. So think about where you're sending people and what you're doing with them. You don't want to send them off for 5 miles and then they're confronted by a severely inclining hill. They probably will come back and they probably won't be in any better mood for having had a detour. So that's one of the things you might want to think about. Now I know some of you out there will be thinking about feeding and watering and helping and housing migrants, and I think that's a very reasonable thing to do in late SHTF. I think in early SHTF you're really asking for a whole bunch of trouble if you try and help 1,000 people, 10,000 people or 100,000 people. You don't have the resources. Your resources are the same as theirs. You have what you have, you're probably not going to get any more. So think carefully. Where are the local centres of population near you and think it out 50 to 100 miles, 50 to 150 kilometres. Where are they? What routes are they going to take out of those places if they decide they have to move? Are they going to head directly at you, or are they obviously going to bypass? If they're obviously going to bypass, a few trees down, a few signage, things like that, even the odd dead body hanging from a roadside lamppost actually might encourage them to follow the natural path. They will automatically walk left. When you walk in a straight line without a compass and without road signage across fields, the human body, especially at night, tends to bear left. So take that in mind as well. Over a long enough distance, you might think they're not going to come at you, but they may well come at you because they've diverted 10 to 15 miles off there because of the natural tendency to bear left. So that's something you might want to think about. You also might want to think about hiding your resources. You might want to think about that anyway. You might want to think about appearing abandoned. You might even, in fact, bug out of your home for a period of time to allow it to be used as a refugee centre until they die or leave, or you deal with them in another way, rather than confront a horde of people. The myth of the Golden Horde is a myth. When SHTF happens, there won't be a mass exodus out of the cities. There will be a mass exodus out of the city for people who are going to prep sites, family cottages. People will leave to go somewhere. That for sure will happen, and I think it will destroy the road system and probably the train early on. And I wouldn't try flying. But later on, people are going to hunker in place. It's the natural human thing to do. I'm staying where I am, I'm staying where I am, things will get better, somebody will help me. The governments are almost certain to be passing that radio and TV message, and even flyers dropped from the air on any population centre telling them to stay in place. A period of time will go by. Now this could be 1 day, 2 days, 2 weeks, a week, who knows? And a significant number of people will trickle away each day. But at some point, a large number of them in a city centre, faced with adverse weather, will just get up and leave. And it's the mass herd effect. If you've studied the psychology of mobs, and you should, you'll be aware of the fact that once a significant number of them move, or most of them will move, and they're not going to get very far. They're going to have probable cold and malnutrition issues, plus really wobbly physical abilities, and they'll also have a few other things going on. So the idea that they're going to travel 1,000 miles and invade your homestead is ludicrous. And a lot of people out there do have bug out retreats that are a significant distance from any population centre and well off any obvious track line, and would be physically almost impossible, especially in the winter if it snows, to get to. And that's great. But a lot of people don't. A lot of people are in suburban areas. So you might be in ex-suburban area, and that might be right next to a major highway. You don't want to be having a fire or any obvious activity or gardening going on in that house next to a major highway or a flat valley floor out of the area, especially if the end of that is a park or farmland. Remember, a lot of city dwellers are going to head to the farming areas. They're going to assume they'll get fed there. I think they'll be in for a bit of a shock, but they'll probably head there. So where is your place, and how will it be affected by other people coming out of population centres? You might want to relocate for a period of time. You may have a very good bug out location, but I said you might want to look for another place that's actually not going to have people wandering by or wandering into it for a period of time until things stabilise and settle down. Now, I am aware that every location has its own challenges. Like I said, up here my main challenge is the cold and growing food, specifically fats. But a lot of people have desert areas. Again, are they able to reach you via watercourses if there's been a lot of flooding? 90 times out of 100 they may not get to your bug out place because it's a desert. But if the weather's involved in this and there's been hurricane or a rainfall, there may be sufficient water for that bunch of people to actually reach you. So that's something you definitely want to think about. If you're surrounded by mountains on one side, if the population is going to head towards those mountains, are they going to come over the mountains, or are they going to turn around? If they turn around because they've given up trying to climb, try and make the area around where they're going to turn nice for them to follow away from where you are. Well, that's all for me. I hope you enjoyed this bit of a talk. There's a lot to think about in terms of bugging out, right? And that's what we all focus on. But we really do need to think a little bit about other people bugging out to where we're going to be, because it's going to be a significant factor. There's an awful lot of people now on the planet, and most people aren't just going to stay and starve to death in their cities and towns if there's a massive collapse of society. Now, obviously, if it's a localized event, you want to help people out as much as possible, right? This has purely been talking about if there's nuclear war, if there's a global catastrophe on an immense scale that involves pretty much every nation on the planet. So think about that. Where would people arrive to your location from? How would they get there? How could you maybe mitigate their arrival in terms of helping them out or directing them elsewhere if you don't feel like you want to help them out or you're able to safely help them out? A lot to think about. Anyway, that's all from me. Remember, in SHTF, tomorrow will always be worse than today unless you prepare. So prepping in this case means making sure you have really good topographical maps a long way away from your bug out zones, which might be your home or somewhere else or a friend's. There's lots of opportunities to bug out, and you should have redundancies to where you would bug out. And thinking about the issues not only of you getting from where you are to the bug out, but other people who might come by looking for any sort of food or water or shelter they can find. And if you're dealing with 10 to 20 to 40 to 100 to 500,000 people, you're not going to defend the bug out. It's not going to happen. Toodles. Oh, and give me a subscription because I'm trying to grow the channel again. Toodles. This video is brought to you by Bad Terrier Productions 2019.